When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and some of the scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw Jesus, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. Jesus asked the crowd, "What are you arguing about?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak, and whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they couldn't do it." Jesus answered them, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw Jesus, immediately it threw the boy into convulsions, and he fell on the ground and he rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, How long has this been going on?" And Jesus said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire or into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have pity on us and help him." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keep this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." After crying out and convulsing him terribly, the spirit came out, and the boy was like a corpse. So that most of them said, "Is he dead?" But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. Amen. So the scene that we're presented with in our text this morning, there's confusion and there's panic, there's frustration, there's doubt, and yet our hero, Jesus, steps in, and by the end of the interaction of all these things, it seems to be all right. Jesus even has a little bit of a powwow with his disciples right after these verses that he uses as a learning tool. Everyone comes out on top of this scenario, especially the little kiddo. Jesus, James, John, and Peter, they had just come back from the Transfiguration. Now that's where they go up on top of the mountain. That's where Jesus becomes dazzling white. And that's when Elijah and Moses show up. And that's when they kind of have that little interaction up there. So he becomes all dazzling white. And then they're on their way back. And they are returning to meet up with the disciples. And they're all feeling pretty good because they had just had that amazing mountaintop experience. They're just about where they told the other disciples that they were going to meet up. And then they notice down in the distance a little bit of commotion. There's a crowd that seems to have formed, and as Jesus and the others get closer, they can see Matthew and Judas right smack in the middle of the crowded group. Everybody kind of surrounding them, and as they get closer, they can sort of hear some voices rising, and there's voices of concern, there's anger, there's panic, there's frustration. "Please, there has to be something else you can do," a man cries out to Matthew. "Sir, we have done everything that we can possibly do. There's nothing else that we can try." Now the crowd might become a little more hostile towards Matthew and Judas because they're running out of ideas and they expect some results. After all, these are Jesus' disciples, for crying out loud. What is going on?" exclaims Jesus. For one man, Jesus really can get his voice to carry. He must have been a teacher. The crowd turns to see who the newcomer is, recognizing that this is indeed, it's Jesus. The very Jesus that Mark has been telling stories about for 9 chapters. It's him, it's Jesus, it's the healer. One man steps forward from the crowd. "Teacher, this is my son. I brought him here so that he might see your disciples and so they could make him well. They've tried, but they can't do it." Jesus looked at the man and he says, "Well, what are his symptoms?" The father replies, "His body seizes up. He collapses. My boy begins to shake. His mouth begins to foam. He hurts himself when he falls." and then it only becomes worse. We believe it's a demon that has attacked. Your disciples have tried, but to no avail. Jesus cries out, how long is it going to take for you guys to get this? You faithless generation. I'm gone for one day, and while I'm gone, nothing gets done. Let's see the boy. The crowd was taken aback by the shift in Jesus' tone, but the boy was quickly brought before him. And as the boy is brought before Jesus, the boy looks up and he recognizes that it's Jesus. And the boy is thrown into convulsions, and at once he begins foaming at the mouth. I'm not sure if you've ever seen anything like that, like a seizure or something like that, but it's very scary. It's very scary. Jesus, not fazed by the reaction, asks the father, how long has your son been doing this? The father replies, since childhood. The demon, it takes possession of him, and when he collapses, it's often around water or fire, and it causes more harm. Please, Jesus, if you can do something, please do it, the father pleaded. If I could do something, Jesus exclaims, anything is possible for the one who believes. I believe, Jesus, replied the father, but I need help with my unbelief. Jesus looks at the father and he recognizes that love that is reflected between the bond of a parent and a child. The crowd had grown significantly quiet and significantly larger since the spirit had come out of the boy. With one last violent convulsion, the boy's body lies still in the midst of the crowd. The father is by his side, weeping in the silence of the crowd, unsure of the fate of his boy. A tentative voice lifts up from the crowd, is the boy dead? Jesus kind of rolls his eyes and he reaches down for the boy's hand, and with Jesus' help, the boy stands up and this crowd is amazed. They've never seen anything like this. We see an amazing story that's got so many different moving characters. We see that Jesus appears to have a little bit of frustration with his disciples and the crowd, and it makes us wonder, is Jesus frustrated because his disciples haven't been able to heal the boy before he got there? Is he frustrated at the boy or father for not having the faith that they hoped from? Is Jesus upset with the crowd, possibly embarrassed that his disciples were making him look bad by not being able to heal this boy? Jesus is kind of put in a tough spot here. But he's Jesus, right? How about the disciples? I bet they feel pretty crummy. They're with Jesus all the time, watching all these miraculous things, hearing his wise words, training as his students, being commissioned by Jesus himself. Jesus leaves, and immediately they are presented with a problem in which they are unable to fix. In front of a crowd, they are embarrassed. And then all of a sudden, Jesus strolls in, and he's like, zim, zam, zalabim, the boy is made well again. They're probably feeling a little bit of shame for not being able to heal the boy themselves, and so publicly. Then there's the father and the boy. Many of us focus on the father more than any other character because it's such a beautiful image of the father doing everything within his power and that of others to help his son. That bond that comes through family, especially that between a parent and a child. The boy is probably unsure of himself and not even convinced that they'll be able to do anything about his condition since he's been having these episodes since a child. In antiquity, there were social norms that everyone participated in. You were kind of born into your role. If you deviated physically or mentally from these norms, you'd have to explain why. If you deviated in a good way, like Jesus showing extensive knowledge of the prophets and Torah, being able to do healings and things like that, it gets ascribed to God or good spirits. If you deviate in sort of a bad way, like our poor child in this story, things still need to be explained. And it would often be viewed as an evil spirit making an attack. If one is perceived to be possessed by evil spirits, as this boy is thought to in the story, they are not just in trouble physically or mentally, but they are ostracized from their community. They are avoided. They are cast out. So this boy's healing is much more than simply not having seizures anymore. He and his family are now allowed to be part of full members of the community. They're allowed to come back. The father has the most memorable line of them all. I believe, help my unbelief. The father asks for Jesus' help, and Jesus' reply is, what do you mean if I could do anything about it? Anything can be done for the one who believes. It could be my time working at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta that's coloring my lens here, but that makes me a little bit uncomfortable when I first started reading this text. The father has cared about his son enough to drag him all the way out to Jesus and his disciples, probably having tried a number of other things along the way. In one of the greatest acts of humility that I have seen in all of these sacred texts before us, the father looks at Jesus and says, I believe, but I need help with my unbelief. This phrase sticks out to us because it reeks of humility. It's raw with emotion, a written testament of compassion from the Father for his Son. He has lost faith in his own identity as a parent who is taking care of their child. And in his despair, he cries out for Jesus' help. The father is crying out not only for help with his son to heal him and bring him, but to bring him back into the household and into the community. The father is crying out for help and comfort as a father who does not know what to do for their child. Perhaps in Jesus' comments about faith, he is reminding the father that he has done everything he can. That the years of caring for his son all the way up to this moment that he has been brought before Jesus, the father has been the best father that he can be. And Jesus is reminding him of that in this moment. After reading this passage over and over again, Jesus' words, all things can be done for the one who believes, come across not as a chastising the father, but a reassurance that the boy's fate has been placed in the right hands. The phrase, I believe, help my unbelief, is affirmed, even if it is said after Jesus' comment. In the father's doubting and despair, Jesus affirms the hope that the father knows, but just needs a little bit of a nudge. Doubt and struggle, fear and loss of identity, when there is a safe place made for these thoughts and questions, they help to lead us where we need to go. It is through the process of being allowed to grow that Jesus affirms within us what is already there, that divine spark. How great it is that God makes a space for that. Amen.